Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. We're past the time of green-skinned witches. We've entered the realm of computer glitches. But don't let that stop you. Double down and charge through. Don't let obstacles keep you from your riches. Welcome to Backlook Cinema, the podcast. My name is Zoe, that's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. It's the 135th episode. Thank you for downloading and streaming. We really appreciate it. We watched the movies of yesteryear that we loved from the latter half of the 1900s. If you like what you're about to hear, then tell your family, tell your friends, and tell that green-skinned witch the next time you see her to, in a puff of red smoke, to listen to Backlook Cinema, the podcast. And this week, there are no guests. It's just me by my lonesome. We're still going to go through and talk about one of my favorite movies. And the thing about this movie is that it was one of those that it's unusual in a sense that it was it's not a movie specifically from the 70s, 80s, or 90s. It is from the last millennium, so it's not that far away. But it's one of those that I grew up with. It came on TV every year, and I feel like I watched it every year. And it's just one of those things that it was just part of the fabric of growing up in the 70s and 80s. And I wanted to include that movie in this show. So that movie is The Wizard of Oz. And here we are in the opening credits to talk about The Wizard of Oz. And about this movie, after a freak meteorological event, a young girl and her dog find themselves in a strange, terrible, and wonderful land filled with incredible people and places. But what she wants more than ever is to get back home to Kansas. She sets forth on her journey to one man who might be able to get her home. On the way, she's joined by a scarecrow, a tin woodsman, a lion, and on her heels is the Wicked Witch of the West. This movie was released August 25th, 1939, produced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, currently known as MGM. It grossed over $24 million, and translated today, that would be $535 million, and that's in the U.S. and Canada. And it had a reported budget of $2 million, which would be $44 million today, just adjusted for inflation. Now, that sounds impressive, but there are kind of like conflicting stories of how much money this movie actually made when it was first released. So it wasn't a flop when it first released. I think it made a profit, but it wasn't this grand profit that I'm quoting to you now. I think this $24 million figure comes from all of its releases. Like if you combine all of the theatrical releases of this movie, then you get this figure. But I don't think it grossed this much in its very first release. And, back in the 1930s, 1940s, you obviously there wasn't a lot of people streaming movies at home. There were no streaming options, obviously, that there were no rental stores. There's nothing like that. You saw a movie and you saw it as many times as you could during its initial release, and then it was removed from theaters, sometimes forever. But a lot of times movies would just get re-released. For one thing, they might stay in the theaters for years, depending on how popular they are. And then they would be pulled from theaters and then they're re-released. So I think that if you count out all the re-releases of The Wizard of Oz, you would get this massive figure of $24 million off of a $2 million budget. So, and then obviously when it started to be featured on television, it would just show it on television all of the time. And this is before cable. This is before cable television when people, or before it was like massively popular, and they would just show it on network television. It's seemingly all of the time. And so that is my reference point for this movie. So this movie stars Judy Garland as Dorothy Gale. You may have also seen her in A Star is Born from 1954, Meet Me in St. Louis, and Judgment at Nuremberg. Frank Morgan played Professor Marvel. He also played Guardian of the Gates. He also played a soldier. And he's most famously known as the Wizard of Oz. He's been in Shop Around the Corner, Tortilla Flat, and Trouble for Two. There are a lot of these actors. They played multiple roles. So one of these actors is Ray Bolger. He played Hank Andrews and the Scarecrow. He's been in Babes in Toyland, Where's Charlie, and April in Paris. Burt Lair played Zeke and the Cowardly Lion. And he's been in Sing Your Worries Away, Ship Ahoy, and Meet the People. You would notice a lot of these movies from the 1930s are musical, and they will have the song. They will have the word sing in the title. Sing, song, dance, something of that nature. So continuing on, we have Jack Haley. He played Hickory Twicker. I think Hickory Twicker. We're going to continue. I don't know if I typed that correctly. He played the Tin Woodsman. Well, Jack Haley played Hickory Twicker and the Tin Woodsman, or Woodman, the Tin Woodman. It's weird that he's the Tin Woodman because he's not made of wood. At any rate, he's been in Vacation in Rio, Sing Your Way Home, and One Body, Too Many. Billy Burke played Glinda. She's been in Merrily We Live, Dinner at 8, and Topper. Margaret Hamilton played Miss Elmira Gulch and the Wicked Witch of the West. She's also been in 13 Ghosts from 1960, Brewster McCloud, and Nothing Sacred. Charlie Greatwin played Uncle Henry Gale. He's been in The Grapes of Wrath, The Petrified Forest, and Alice Adams. Interestingly enough, neither he nor the next actor, Clara Bloddick, who played Auntie M, had multiple roles. Most of the characters, well, actually, it seems like the Gale family did not have multiple roles. So Charlie Greatwin played Uncle Henry, and then Clara Bloddick played Auntie M, or Auntie Emily Gale. And Dorothy, none of these characters had dual roles. They only had one role in the movie, whereas you had, like, the Wicked Witch had a character in the real world and in Oz, and you had the Tin Man had a character in the real world and in Oz. So I'm just now figuring this. I'm just reasoning this out right now as I'm speaking into this microphone. And lastly, but certainly not the least, we have Terry, who played Toto. And the only other thing that's in his IMDb page is Barefoot Boy, although he's been featured in several shows and movies. So this movie was directed by Victor Fleming, and King Vidor has an uncredited role as director. Fleming has directed Gone with the Wind, famously. That's probably another movie that had played over and over again from when I was growing up. But I'm not as enamored with Gone with the Wind as I am with The Wizard of Oz. He also had a movie, Captain Courageous, A Guy Named Joe, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's another movie that I sort of... I want to say that I've seen Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I was certainly aware of it. I think it's a lot of these horror movies from the 30s. I've probably seen like pieces of them, but never watched them the whole way through. As for Vidor, he directed War and Peace, Hallelujah, Show People, The Big Parade, and The Fountainhead. This movie was written by Noel Langley, Florence Rice, I'm going to mess up this name, Florence Ryerson, and Edgar Allan Wolfe. It was based on the original children's novel, The Wizard of Oz, by L. Frank Baum. So Langley had also written for Snow White and the Three Stooges, The Pickwick Papers, and The Adventures of Sadie. Ryerson wrote Everybody Sing, Tough Guy, and The Return of Dr. Fu Manchu. Wolfe also wrote on Everybody Sing, Tough Guy. Oh, wait a minute. Those are two different movies. It's Everybody Sing and Tough Guy. Those are two different movies. So Ryerson and Wolfe both written on both of those two movies. And Wolf also wrote on The Night is Young. Up next is the music. The music is by Harold Arlen and Herbert Stothart. Both of them are uncredited. And when you look at these earlier movies, you'll notice that they'll front load the movie with a bunch of credit, and then they'll backload with the end credits. But both of them are short. Sometimes the end credits are even shorter than the opening credits. And a lot of people in these early days go totally uncredited. It's not like today where you have the entire studio down to the gopher that opens the door for you, down to the driver that drives the cars. Everybody's credited in modern movies, but back in the day, hardly anybody received credit. And that was including the people who made the music that made this movie possible. This was a musical, so you go to the movie because there's music in it, and they don't have a credit for the people who made the music. And that is fascinating. So the first credit, Harold Arlen, he also wrote music for Get Happy for the Dumb Patrol. He wrote that song. He wrote I Love a Parade for Manhattan Parade. So the music that he is responsible for in this movie is Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, with lyrics by E.Y. Herberg. And obviously E.Y. Herberg should be credited because in the following songs that he basically wrote all the lyrics for example, If I Only Had a Brain. I'm getting through this. If I Only Had a Brain and Over the Rainbow. Those are the songs that he wrote lyrics for. And these are also the songs that Harold Arlen had written the music for. So, and I didn't dig too deep in it, but, it's fair to say that they probably wrote most of the songs in this movie. And also Over the Rainbow is also known as Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's probably one of the most famous songs in history. And they didn't even get credit for it. So still blowing my mind. So the composer of this movie was Stothart, and he has 111 credits to his name. He also he also composed music for A Night at the Opera, If Winter Comes, The Green Years, and They Were Expendable. I'm pretty sure that is different from the Expendable movies that we have today. So that's it for the opening credits. And I guess it's a good time to announce that I'm going to discontinue the Sunday morning snap. Yeah, I had fun doing it, but I have found that it's really splitting my concentration on producing material. So I think that since I started Sunday morning snap, I hadn't produced a newsletter. So I should probably concentrate on producing the newsletter. So that's all I have for the announcements, and let's go to our next. Let me learn how to speak. Let's go to our next segment. Our favorite parts. I usually have like a top 5, but I'm going to meander with the favorite parts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the story and talk about some of my favorite parts. I don't know if I could limit them to 5. We'll see as we go along. So this is the original adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. It's interesting that although there are other stories that are adopted off of The Wizard of Oz, this is like the only movie that has the title The Wizard of Oz, and it is a direct adaptation of the original book. There are other movies that have adapted the story. There's one of the reasons that I'm doing the show is because soon you'll have the musical, what's it called? Oh, I think I remember. I think it's Wicked. So Wicked is a musical that's based on one of the characters of The Wizard of Oz. I actually read the book, and as a matter of fact, I read the whole series. The original book, and I think maybe the first sequel that I really enjoyed. But then the sequels kind of get loaded down with lore as you go on, and they become less interesting as you read them. But I think the first two books are really interesting. There's also The Wiz, is obvious, one of the adaptations, but it's one of those that's like, it's not called The Wizard of Oz. And then there's a kind of a movie, I think it's called The Return to Oz or something like that. There are a couple of movies that are kind of based on that adaptation. There's the origin of the wizard. So there are those versions, but there's not really another version that's really chronicling the Wizard of Oz in quite the same way that this movie does. And that is surprising. So what's really impressive is when I remember watching this movie growing up, I remember it, the black and white portion. The movie famously starts off in black and white, but when I rewatched it this time, I realized it's not merely black and white. It's in sepia tone. So it's kind of got a brown tint to it. So that was kind of surprising. It looks different when you see it as sepia tone than as in black and white. So it was almost shocking seeing it this way. And the other thing that's interesting is that the actors in this movie are incredible. Like Mrs. Gulch is menacing on her bicycle, which is strange. It's like you see Mrs. Gulch, and as I mentioned before, she's played by what's her name? I'm looking for her name right now. Anyway, she's menacing on a bicycle. She has a menacing face, and it's like it's not someone that you really wanted to get to know. So that's she's played by Margaret Hamilton, and it's like, man, it's amazing how you can be menacing on a bicycle. I'll just say that, because you don't really think of a bicycle as a vehicle that a menacing person would ride. So, one of my favorite parts is that there's real chemistry between Dorothy and Toto. It feels like it's her dog. It's like there's nothing that doesn't say that this dog doesn't belong to her. It's pretty awesome. And Toto is a real character in this movie. People kind of tend to think that Toto is just a companion, just the dog that follows her around, and that, she protects it because it's her dog. But the reality is Toto is the reason why Dorothy gets into all the predicaments that she gets into. He's the actuator of the story. It's the reason that that the story begins, is that, like, Dorothy is trying to protect Toto from Mrs. Gulch because Toto decided to attack. I think Toto tried to attack one of Mrs. Gulch's cats or pets or something like that. Like, Toto is the villain here. Toto actually went out and attacked something that didn't belong to him. and Dorothy is like trying to protect Toto from Mrs. Gulch. Mrs. Gulch has a protection order against Toto. She's given permission by the state to or the sheriff or some political authority to take Toto and take it to a place where Toto could be put down, because Toto is a menace and attacking things. I think at one point, either he snipped at or tried to bite Mrs. Gulch. I can't remember. It's getting kind of fuzzy already. But Toto is a bad boy. And Dorothy wants to protect Toto. So there is a whole character about Toto. And then at the end of the movie, Toto is mostly kind of behaving himself, but there is a point where Dorothy is being taken home at the end of the movie by the Wizard of Oz, and he's taking her home in a balloon. But what happens is that Toto sees a cat, and he's like, I gotta get that cat. I gotta have that cat. I gotta mess with that cat. So he jumps out of a balloon basket before it really gets into the air, and he chases down this cat, and Dorothy has to follow Toto to get Toto to protect the cat from Toto. And then the balloon has already risen, it's taken off, and the wizard does not know how to control the balloon. So it's like, oh, sorry, I don't know how it works. And he basically pisses off, and the wizard is gone, and and Dorothy are stuck in Oz. So Toto is kind of a problem. He's his own character. And that's one of the things that I noticed in the rewatch, is how much of a character that Toto is. So going along with the story, one of the things that that was interesting about the story, Dorothy had landed in Munchkinland, and it feels like to me the Munchkinland sequence goes on just a little long, just a tad bit long. It's an involved sequence with her being, and when she lands in Munchkinland, they do a lot in that first few minutes. It seems to go on for a while. I remember one of the things that's coming back to me also is that I don't clearly remember the beginning of the movie when it was in black and white. Now because there are a lot of sequences that I don't remember. Like I don't remember, there's a part where Dorothy is kind of like playing on the fence, like she's walking along the fence in her, at their home, and cause they live on a farm. So there's a pig pen. So she's walking on the fence of the pig pen, and then she like falls in the pig pen, and she has to be rescued by, what's his name? I'm trying to remember what the dude's name is. Zeke. So Zeke has to go in the pig pen and rescue her. And I don't remember any of that clearly anyways. And then the part where she runs away from home and she goes and she meets this dude on the road that's claiming to be somebody who could tell the future. And the guy is basically the type of dude that it's like he would give some of your personal effects and then try to divine what your future or your past or everything. So he kind of surreptitiously gets some of Dorothy's things, and he's able to tell Dorothy about herself. And plus, understanding young people, he's able to determine that Dorothy is running away from home, and he encourages to go back home because her aunt is concerned about her. I don't remember a lot of that either. I don't remember that clearly. I remember the part that I most remember is when the tornado comes and it raises the house off of the farmland, and she gets knocked out. She sees like the Mrs. Gulch turn to the Wicked Witch, and I think she sees one of the flying monkeys, and then the house lands, and then she opens up the door from black and white to color, and she's in Oz. That's the part I remember. I think it's because I was less interested in the part of the story that was in black and white and more interested in the singing and dancing in the full color version of the story. So that's interesting. And it's also interesting to finally see the full movie from beginning to end, as close as it was to being in theaters as you can get watching it at home without commercial interruptions, etc. So moving right along, one of my other favorite parts is the Scarecrow. So the meeting of the Scarecrow, the actor that played the Scarecrow, Hank Andrews, it looks like he's made of rubber, and his physicality is amazing. The way he's able to effectuate the way a Scarecrow might move if it could walk. He's basically, it's difficult for him to stand up or to walk around because he's made of straw. And I love the way that Hank Andrews portrays a newly freed Scarecrow. It's a wonderful sequence. And I just like the Scarecrow as a character. And what I really like is how the movie telegraphs how, like at the end of the movie, the wizard says, the Scarecrow needs a brain, the lion needs a heart, the Tin Man needs, the lion needs courage, and the Tin Man needs a heart. And at the end of the movie, the wizard kind of gives them these trinkets and basically tells them that they've had these qualities all along. And you see, I like the way the story in the movie is constructed, how the Scarecrow is already like thinking up stuff. He's already devising plans. He's already doing things to show that he is in fact intelligent. He actually has a brain, or not necessarily that he has a brain, that he's intelligent in a way that he doesn't require a brain to be smart or to devise schemes. So there is a part like right after the Scarecrow is freed that they go into an apple tree forest, and Dorothy wants to pick some apples, and she's attacked by this apple tree. And then the Scarecrow is like, I'll show you how to get apples. And then he starts, making fun of the apple trees, and the apple trees get incensed, and they start picking their own apples and throwing them at Dorothy and the Scarecrow. And that's kind of neat. I like how, and then the Scarecrow is doing this pretty much throughout the movie, just thinking up stuff and like being, what's the word? It's like he's not conscious of how intelligent he is. So that's interesting. So, my favorite parts involves the introduction of the various characters. So the next one they meet is the lion is another favorite part. And it's one of the most impactful part because I remember like every single time that I watched this part when I was growing up, I was terrified of the lion coming out of the forest because it's like, it seems like he comes out of nowhere. He just kind of, it's like the land is full of green, and then he sort of bounds out of the background, this brown ball of fur, and the way he bounds at Dorothy the Dorothy the Scarecrow and Toto, the way he bounds out of the forest, out of the background, as a child, that terrified me for some reason I cannot quantify. I think it's the sudden nature of him just appearing out of nowhere and then basically growling and just being a menace to everybody else until he's slapped by Dorothy because the lion had threatened Toto, and whenever Dorothy's friends are attacked, she's not going to put up with it. She's like that. Like she might be frightened, but as soon as you do something to her, she forgets that she was afraid. And so that's what happened with the lion. The lion basically menaced Toto, and she slapped the lion in the face. Like, why would you do that? and then the lion becomes instantly afraid. And so he joins the party to try to get some courage. So moving along with my favorite parts, it's the Tin Man. He has a great musical number at his introduction. I also like his physicality in that, so the Tin Man was played by Jack Haley, as fluid as Hunk Andrews. Well, not Hunk Andrews, but as fluid as Ray Bolger was as the Scarecrow. You have Jack Haley as stiff as the Woodman. So his movements are stiff. He's, because he hasn't been oiled in a while, and he's made of metal. So even after he's well old, he still moves a little bit stiffly. And I'm pretty sure that the costume that he had to wear kind of helped with his stiffness. So that was pretty wonderful. And I enjoyed all of that. I enjoyed it when, the three get together there, and then they start skipping down the road in lockstep. That's all pretty wonderful. Now the next scene I want to talk about is interesting because there's a poppy scene. So they go in the field, they're on their way. They're almost to Oz. The Wicked Witch wants to halt their progress. Like she wants Dorothy's shoes, so she figures that she's going to have them, she's going to trap them in a poppy field. So the purpose of trapping them in a poppy field is so that she can send her flying monkeys to retrieve Dorothy and get the shoes or something like that. But I don't remember the poppy scene. Well, here's the thing. It's not that I don't remember. It's that it wasn't shown all the time. Like sometimes I would watch the movie and I would see the poppy scene, but sometimes I would watch it and it would be missing. Like it would be edited out. And actually, I would more often not see the poppy scene. There were whole years I would never see the poppy scene, and then one year I would see it, and I was like, "Where did this come from? Right? Where did this poppy scene come from? The poppy field scene." So in the scene, that's when they're walking through the poppy field, and the witch has a spell that puts them to sleep. And then Glinda comes along and she counters the spell and wakes them up. Not all of them, just Dorothy and the lion and presumably Toto, since they're biological. And they wake up and they, go to the city in Oz City, I guess it's called. So that's a funny scene because I don't think it was in every version of the TV presentation that I watched. And so moving right along, going to my next favorite scene is King of the Forest. This is 5. Usually I stop at 5, but I'm going to go one more. So the King of the Forest, and the speech that the lion gives when just before they meet the wizard. That's great. I really loved that. I really enjoyed that scene. So it's a wonderful song. It's wonderful how they surround the lion and support him in his effort to gain courage. At one point, they take a rug off the ground and they drape it around the lion as a cape. And then the Tin Man takes a potted plant and cuts it with his axe, and it has jagged edges on one side. The top of the planter is smooth, so he puts the smooth part on the lion's head, and the jagged edges are facing up, so it looks like a crown. So that's all fascinating. They go and meet the wizard. The wizard is terrifying Dorothy and her gang. He's terrifying them. He's scaring them, but at the same time, and he's insulting them. But he agrees to go ahead and grant their wishes if they could bring back the broomstick of the Wicked Witch. I think in the original story, he out and out tells them to kill the Wicked Witch, but that's not what they wanted to show in the movie, or at least they didn't want that in the movie. So they said that, so the wizard says that he wants them to bring the broomstick, but the gang is able to put 2 and 2 together. It's either the lion or the scarecrow, or one of them. I can't remember. Basically, they say in order to do that, we'd have to kill her. And the wizard is kind of like, that's not my problem. You got to bring me that broomstick. So, and then he tells them to go, and he screams at them. The lion, they had to drag the lion to the wizard because he's terrified the entire time. So when the wizard screams at them to go, he books. He runs down the hallway and he jumps out the window. And I'm gonna have to put that as one of my favorite parts, because that's one of my most impactful memories, is that when the lion running down the hallway and diving out the window to get away from the wizard, that's crashes through the window. He has to crash through the window to get away from the wizard. So that's fascinating. So another part that I want to touch on that I feel like I missed in all of my previous viewings of The Wizard of Oz. So this is what I missed. On their way to the witch's castle, they actually come equipped. They equip themselves. So one of them has a net. I think it's the lion. The lion has a net, or Dorothy has a net. I can't remember, but they have a net. The Tin Woodsman has a hammer and his axe. Like, he already has his axe and he carries it all the time, but now he has a hammer and an axe. The lion is carrying a gigantic container of witch spray. It's I don't know if you've seen these old insect repellents. It kind of had it was kind of like a pump action poison spreader, and the lion had this giant container of what looks like an old style insect repellent, and it's labeled as a witch repellent, and I imagine that it's filled with water, because what else would you do to repel witches? So he has this giant bug spray, basically. And then the Scarecrow has a revolver. The Scarecrow got a gat. So They were really for real was going to kill this witch. I mean, between the axe, the witch repellent, which is probably filled with water, so they was going to spray water mist at her, and the scarecrow with a gun, they were sincerely going to end this witch. So it's not like they were going unprepared. They were fully prepared. Then their plans are made, it goes awry because, awry, I should say, because they're attacked by the flying monkeys. So that's that. They had no chance against the flying monkeys. So they have this whole thing with the adventure at the witch's castle, and there's another moment where the scarecrow has a brilliant idea. They see the soldiers and they're having a formation in front of the castle, so he gets the idea to jump the soldiers. But the funny thing is that they were going to jump a couple of the soldiers and take their uniform, but instead they get jumped by the soldiers from their hiding, because they're hiding in the woods or whatever, watching the soldiers, and they were going to go after the soldiers, but then they get attacked by the soldiers, but they're able to overpower the soldiers and take their uniforms. So that was the brilliant idea, was to take the soldier's uniform and just march in the castle in the formation of the other soldiers. The only thing that might give them away was the lion's tail kept poking out of the soldier's uniform, but nobody noticed. He was the last one in line and nobody's really looking. So they get into the castle. So another brilliant stratagem by the scarecrow. And then obviously you have the thing where they're running around and whatnot, and finally the witch has him cornered. She grabs a broomstick and she threatens the scarecrow with fire and starts to set him on fire. And Dorothy is incensed, and she finds a bucket of water, which, why would a bucket of water be in a witch's castle? Who cares? It's there. She grabs it. She throws it at she really is trying to put the scarecrow out, but some of the water gets on the witch, and the witch starts to melt. And she's really sorry about it. Like, even though she knows that killing the witch is the only way to get the witch's broomstick that the wizard needs in order to get home, she's horrified that she did this. And one of my favorite lines in the movie is when the witch says, "Who'd have thought that a good little girl like you could destroy my beautiful wickedness?" I just love that line. And so, I would have to put that as my last favorite part. So all in all, I had a good time with this movie. You have the, I explained earlier how they go back to the wizard. They discovered that the wizard is a fraud, and he gives them trinkets because they were brave, they were smart, and they had a heart all along. And so he basically gives them trinkets in order to reinforce the things that they were already inside of them. And throughout the movie, or throughout the trip, either to the wizard or back from the witch's castle back to Oz, that they just display all of the qualities that they had all along. Except, I think, for the lion, like the lion is, I feel like the lion is brave in spurts. It's like, it's not so obvious with the lion as it is with the scarecrow or with the Tin Woodman. But he obviously would not have even gone on the journey had he not had the courage to do so, had he not had the courage to seek out the wizard in the first place with Dorothy, had he not had the courage to go to the witch's castle, and to go through with all of the plans. Like, he didn't want to do these things, but he did it anyway in spite of his fear. So kind of the very definition of courage. So, those are my favorite parts of The Wizard of Oz. Those are the things that I loved about the movie. And I kind of did some broad strokes of the story. Most people listening to this is familiar with the story of The Wizard of Oz, so I didn't get into too much detail, but, the songs are well sung. The performances were great. The voices were magnificent. It's just an overall fun time at the movies. if you can do it. So those are my favorite parts. And now we're going to go into the trivia. Usually I have a top 10 trivia, but there was so much going on with this movie that I just put all of the trivia. And I think I got like 17 points of trivia from this movie. The first one is many shots were trimmed down or edited out of the film because they were too intense for families and children. In particular, one deleted scene shows the tornado completely enveloping the farmhouse. Also later in the film, a lot of the Wicked Witch of the West scenes were either trimmed or deleted entirely, as Margaret Hamilton's performance was thought to be too frightening for audiences, which is kind of funny. This is obviously before the rating system, and they really didn't want to scare away the children. When the wardrobe department was looking for a coat for Frank Morgan, he played Professor Marvel and the Wizard. The wardrobe department decided they wanted one that looked like it had once been elegant, but had since become dilapidated. They visited a secondhand store and purchased an entire rack of coats, from which Morgan, the head of the wardrobe department, and director Victor Fleming chose one that they felt gave off the perfect appearance of shabby gentility. One day, while he was on set in the coat, he idly, and this is the actor, this is Frank Morgan, he idly had been turning out the pockets, and he discovered a label indicating that it had been made for L. Frank Baum. Mary Mayer, the unit publicist for the film, contacted the tailor and Baum's widow, and both verified that it had at one time been owned by the author of the original Wizard of Oz books. After the filming was completed, it was presented to Mrs. Baum. So that's an incredible coincidence. So the shortness of this little piece of trivia is that, you had all of these people going around looking for a coat that had once been elegant. They went to like a secondhand store. They found a coat that they liked. They put it on, and the actor, Frank Morgan, had just so happened to be looking through the pockets, as you would do with the costume, and found out that it had been made for the author of The Wizard of Oz. That's just magical. It's a magical thing happened on this magical movie, but not a lot of magical things happened in the movie, as we'll see. So, Margaret Hamilton, a single mother, got into an argument with the studio over guaranteed time to work, only agreeing to take the role of the Wicked Witch 3 days before filming. Ironically, although she finally got an agreement for 5 weeks of work, she ended up working on the film for 3 months. So that's pretty cool. It's like, look, I'm a single mother. I can't be going on a set for like a couple of days. I'll do this other thing over here that has guaranteed work. You got to work with me over here. Up next, we have Julie Garland found it difficult to be afraid of Margaret Hamilton because she was such a nice lady off camera. And there are numerous accounts of Hamilton being like just a gem of a person. The horses in the Emerald City, I'm flumming the words. The horses in the Emerald City were colored with gelatin powder. The velvet scenes had to be shot quickly before they started to lick it off. So that's fascinating. The horses found that they were colored with a delicious substance, and they tried to lick it all off. The famous Surrender Dorothy skywriting scene was done by Jack McMaster using a tank of water and oil and a tiny model witch attached to the end of a long hypodermic needle. The syringe was filled with canned milk and dye. The tip of the needle was put in a tank, and the words were written upside down and in reverse while being filmed from below. It took them 2 months to get it right. There was an added phrase to Surrender Dorothy, which was "or die," WWW, which was cut from the movie before the movie premiered, because because the part that said or die, right? That was why it was cut. They was like, that's too much. We don't want to do that. They don't want to talk about die or death or killing too much in this movie. They allowed it one time, and then it seems like, well, maybe a couple of times. But the skywriting, I guess, was a bridge too far. So that's fascinating. It's also fascinating how they solve problems before CGI or some of the other now easier effects. It's like they had a problem. They figured out a practical way to solve these problems. Is just fascinating. And then as I read here, is like it took the special effects guy months to write this out so that when you saw it in the movie, it looked incredible. It looked magical. Up next, we have Margaret Hamilton. She revealed her approach to the character of the Wicked Witch in an interview with Fred Rogers for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Hamilton saw the witch as a person who relished everything she did, but who ultimately was sad, a sad, lonely figure. A woman who lived in constant frustration as she never got what she wanted. This is, in fact, the basis of the novel and musical Wicked, in which the Wicked Witch of the West is portrayed as an unfortunate protagonist. In the same interview, Hamilton also famously donned the original witch costume to explain that witches are only make-believe and that children shouldn't be afraid of them. That is totally awesome. Judy Garland had to wear a painful corset-style dress device under her torso so that she would appear younger and flat-chested. As she was 16 years old at the time of filming, playing the role of a pre-adolescent girl. The executives behind the film kept Judy Garland on a strict diet and forced her to take pep pills, probably amphetamine pills, to control her appetite. She was meant to stay slim, and producers pressured her to stay in shape for the duration of the film. She was under a lot of pressure, and it said basically the way she was treated on The Wizard of Oz was one of the things that kind of led to her later drug addiction. And you would hope that children in successive years are treated better on sets, but there's a recent documentary that talks about how children were poorly treated on Nickelodeon. So it's like maybe there's been a little bit of progression with child actors, young performers. They still have to go through some of the same things for decades. And hopefully with this recent documentary, the situation will continue to improve. But it's kind of messed up that these things take place. Another thing that's messed up, Garland was slapped by director Victor Fleming during the filming when she got a case of the giggles during the Cowardly Lion scene. So this is the introduction of the Cowardly Lion. And she just had issues. She had issues and complications, and she couldn't stop giggling. And Victor basically lost his shit and slapped Judy Garland. So, and then, later on, he's like, he apologized profusely and Garland forgave him. And I guess she kissed him on the nose or whatever, but still, he had a problem. He didn't know how to deal with young performers. And I understand that, filming is expensive, and there are issues and complications that you have to deal with on the set. But, slapping someone is not how you deal with this problem. Hopefully people will learn from this. Up next, the Munchkins were portrayed by the Singer Midgets, which when you watch the credits of the movie, you think that's a little bit on the nose, but it's not named for their musical abilities, but for Leo Singer, their manager. The troupe came from Europe. Many of them were Jewish, and a number of them took advantage of the trip to stay in the U.S. in order to escape the Nazis. Professional singers dubbed most of their voices, as many of the midgets couldn't speak English or sing well. Only two are heard speaking with their real-life voices, the one who gave Dorothy flowers after she climbed into the carriage. And it's interesting because for a minute I was thinking that these were most of these were children, but I didn't really do a deep dive, but I don't see any confirmation that most of these were played by children. Over the Rainbow was nearly cut from the film. MGM felt that it made the Kansas sequence too long, as well as being too far over the heads of the children for whom it was intended. The studio also thought it was degrading for Judy Garland to sing in a barnyard. A reprise of the song was cut. Dorothy sang it to remember Kansas while imprisoned in the witch's castle. Garland began to cry, along with the crew, because the song was so sad. So yeah, one of the most famous songs in history was almost cut from one of the greatest movies of all time. So that was interesting. It's one of the times when we can cheer about the studio interference being defeated. Ray Bolger was originally cast as the Tin Man. However, he insisted that he would rather play the Scarecrow. His childhood idol, Fred Stone, had originated the role on stage in 1902. Buddy Epson had been cast as the Scarecrow and now switched roles with Bolger. You may remember that Buddy Epson would later go on to play in the Beverly Hillbillies. Unbeknownst to him, however, the makeup for the Tin Man contained aluminum dust, which ended up coating Epson's lungs. He also had an allergic reaction to it. One day he was physically unable to breathe and had to be rushed to the hospital. The part was immediately recast, and MGM gave no public reason why Epson was being replaced. The actor considered this the biggest humiliation he ever endured and a personal affront. When Jack Haley took over the part of the Tin Man, he wasn't told why Epson had dropped out, and in the meantime, the Tin Man makeup was changed from aluminum dust to aluminum paste as one of its key components. However, Epson's vocals remained whenever the song "We're Off to See the Wizard" is played. Jack Haley's vocals were never used during the song, but were used for "If I Only Had a Heart" and "If I Only Had the Nerve." Epson's vocals were also heard in the extended version of "If I Were King of the Forest," though the spoken segment has Haley. Although Epson didn't appear in the film, surviving still photos show him taking part in the Wicked Witch's castle sequence. Up next, in the famous poppy field scene in which Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion fell asleep, this quote-unquote snow used in those camera shots were from 100% industrial-grade chrysotile asbestos, despite the fact that the health hazards of asbestos had been known for several years. What did I say about abuse of the actors on set? In the song "If I Only Had a Heart," the girl who says "Wherefore art thou Romeo" is Adriana Casatoli, the voice of Snow White in Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. She was paid $1,000, that's $22,325 in 2024, for her only line in the film. Bert Lahr's costume weighed 90 pounds. It was made from real lion skin and very hot. The arc lights used to light the set often raised the temperature to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Lahr would sweat so profusely that the costume would be soaked by the end of the day. There were two people whose only job was to spend the night drying it for the next day. It was dry cleaned occasionally, but usually, in the words of one of the crew members, it reeked. In another case of actor abuse, Judy Garland's feet hurt so much while wearing the ruby slippers that she could only do chauffeur shots when they were on camera. A brief glimpse of her wearing her rehearsal soft shoes is briefly visible in the scene where the Tin Man is dancing and falls backwards. Lastly, MGM had originally planned to incorporate a stencil printing process when Dorothy runs to open the farmhouse store before the film switches to Technicolor. Each frame was to be hand-tinted to keep the inside of the door in sepia tone. This process, cumbersome, expensive, and ineffective, was abandoned in favor of a simpler, more cleverer alternative. The inside of the farmhouse was painted sepia, and the Dorothy who opened the door from the inside is not Judy Garland, but her stand-in wearing a sepia-rinsed version of Dorothy's dress. Once the door was open, the camera advances through. Garland, wearing her bright blue dress, walks through the door. That's a fabulous special effects, an incredible problem to solve, and it looks beautiful on film. So that's it for the trivia, the massive amount of trivia that I've chosen to share for The Wizard of Oz. And now we're going to see what the critics thought. So the critics gave it a 98%. The audience had an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes, and IMDb reviews. It has 8.1 out of 10. A very highly rated movie. And so we get to see what Emmanuel Levi from EmmanuelLevi.com wrote. Decades after it was made, this fable retains its emotional power and visual enchantment, an amazing achievement considering different directors worked on it. That's right, this film had not one, not two, but 6 directors: Norman Turok, Richard Thorpe, George Cukor, Mervyn LeRoy, who's also the producer, Victor Fleming, and King Vidor. Presumably, they were all replaced one after the other until there was only Victor Fleming left, and then he left this film to go work on Gone with the Wind, which left King Vidor to finish the job. Yeah, this movie just works. It works on an emotional level, and it is a beautiful film to look at. Russell Maloney from The New Yorker wrote, I sat cringed before MGM's Technicolor production of The Wizard of Oz, which displays no trace of imagination, good taste, or ingenuity. The way it was written, and also the mention of Technicolor, I imagine that this is one of the original reviews. And so, but it's weird that he said it has no trace of imagination, or good taste, or ingenuity. That is so weird for him to say, that he could watch this movie and not see all of that played out before him. But I guess some people are just going to have different opinions. Claudia Puig of USA Today wrote, the blend of old-fashioned classic storytelling with cutting-edge technology is undeniably enthralling. Yes, I have to concur with that. Finally, Otis Ferguson from The New Republic wrote, the story, of course, is some lovely and wild ideas, but the picture doesn't know what to do with them except to be painfully literal and elaborate about everything. I don't know if I can agree with that, but that is certainly an observation. Finally, The Wizard of Oz is, as of this recording, available on streaming. That's it for today. Next week, we'll be back with a movie from yesteryear. It's a classic featuring very young actors who've gone on to do great things. Join us as I welcome Andy Heller from Fat Dude Digs Flicks, the movie podcast. And we reminisce about one of the most engaging coming-of-age stories of all time, Stand By Me. You can follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at Backflix Cinema. If you post on any of these platforms, I'll try to check it out. Don't forget that you can contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backflixcinema.com. One last time, if you liked this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backflix Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.